Hey everyone, welcome to another Magic Online video. Today I'm going to play Green Black Devotion in a 4-round Magic Online daily event. And here's the deal. At the time of recording this, it's 2 days away from the Open in Portland. And I'm planning on playing Jund Monsters, basically just because I haven't tried the deck yet and I think it's good. So, kind of excited for that. But at the same time, I have this deck that I played at the Invitational. And a lot of my losses I can pinpoint like why they happened, and I feel like, you know, that's the first step. That's great. Now I can try and figure out like why that stuff happened and try and fix it and make it so that doesn't happen again. So that's one of the things I really like about Magic, and that's what I'm trying to do now. So basically the changes I made were cutting some mana guys and making the deck a little more threat dense. So instead of like the Caryatids, we have some Gyre Sages. And this was a card that I kind of wanted to play before, but just like never really got around to trying it. And I was like winning a decent amount with the other version too. So it didn't really, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense for me to like try and drastically change my deck. But now that I actually played it in a tournament and had a mediocre result, now I'm going to try and change things. So what Gyre Sage does for you is not really make mana on turn 3 unless you have a Burning Tree Emissary. But if you do go turn 2 Gyre Sage, turn 3 Emissary, evolve it, then you can still play like Pelucranos or an Eidolon Blossoms as normal. So you're not losing too much by playing Gyre Sage because you still have that option. But it is possible that the deck will get some slightly slower draws, like won't be as explosive because of that, but Sage actually gets pretty big. Like there's things like Courser of Crufix, Boon Satyr, Pelucranos, Nylea if it's turned on, where basically like Gyre Sage is going to get evolved with like every one of those big creatures that you play. So I've had it up to a 6/7 thanks to the Arbor Colossuses out of the sideboard, and that's been pretty awesome. Gyre Sage has been a pretty reasonable threat, which again is like kind of one of the things that I needed, just because I was flooding out a lot and just drawing useless mana guys. And having another thing that actually has power and toughness, unlike Sylvan Caryatid, like you can Setessan Tactics a Caryatid and deal 1 damage, but it's not that exciting. So like having something that has power and toughness is pretty exciting, just because it makes the tactics better, gives you more of I don't know, plan A or plan B, depending on which way you want to look at it. Like, my plan A has always just been, like, Nykthos into Garrick and, like, go big, but plan B can be just attacking them. And maybe with these guys, with the Gyre Sages, and I also have some Scavenging Oozes, then that plan B actually becomes the plan A. And then you're just kind of like this, I guess, like, mediocre beatdown deck, but you have the option to go super big with Nykthos and Garrick. So, I'm down to 3 Voyaging Satyrs as well, so I'm basically out 5 mana guys, but I have 3 Gyre Sages. So it's probably going to feel like I'm down like, 3 or maybe 4, because occasionally Gyre Sage is going to make mana on turn 3. But then we have the Scavenging Oozes, which might end up being kind of awkward just because I have Pharika. Random question. And I basically want to like Pharika my own stuff. So if I draw an ooze, and I guess if I'm like oozing all their stuff and all my stuff, and then I draw a Pharika, it's probably not that bad because my ooze is huge, and So maybe that won't be a big deal, but I am kind of skeptical about that. Then we have some Boon Satyrs, which were in like the initial list, but are not that good. Like I said, you're not really a beatdown deck. This does give you a tool to use against control. But if your beatdown plan is generally pretty anemic against control anyway, and you're not going to be winning very many games off of trying to attack them, then yeah, Boon Satyr makes that plan better, but that plan is still pretty bad. So I think that's kind of the spot that we're in, but this is another thing that makes it so I will mulligan less, basically, because in the old version, if I didn't have a mana guy or a Courser of Crufix, I basically had to mulligan just because the draw was so slow. And now if I have like a Gyre Sage and a Boon Satyr, I can keep. Granted, Gyre Sage was taking the spot of Caryatid or whatever, so like I'm only up a couple Boon Satyrs to help those draws, but every little bit helps, I think. And it is an enchantment, so it draws a card off Eidolon, but we are down to only 2 Eidolons. And that's one of the things that I'm not the most sure of, I suppose, just because it is a very powerful card, but it is another 4-mana spell, and that was kind of what was causing me to lose, was just like mulliganing a bunch of slow hands. So I have some 3s instead of 4s, some different mana guys that can actually attack. I cut a land, which may be incorrect. I'm not sure. So I played this last night, won 3-1 in a daily. My loss was to a black deck, which is generally a good matchup, but you know they can still Life Bane zombie you and Thoughtseize you a bunch, and that's basically what happened. My draws were not as good. So these changes, like, some are certainly a step in the right direction, but this may be a bit extreme. And so if I'm building a deck and it's like, all right, it's way over here as far as like it needs the mana guys and the top end. And then like maybe there's like some in between like being like a normal beatdown deck and, you know, mana guys and top end. I think I'm starting like over here as opposed to like here, just because I need to figure out like where in this space I am. And if I slowly inch this way, then I'll figure it out eventually. But I think I figure out where I want to be by going on the huge ends of the spectrum. So maybe that's a little confusing. I don't know. It makes sense in my head. But as for the sideboard, I have basically the same stuff. 3rd Pharika, and at the Invitational, I had 1 Pharika main and 2 in the board, and I think part of that was just because I thought it was only good against the black decks, but I'm also going to keep in 2 against the monsters decks, and therefore I'm going to play 2 main deck and see how that goes. But I definitely want the 3rd one against black decks. I definitely want to go up to 4 Setessan Tactics against Mono Blue, and Mono Blue was 2 of the decks that I beat in the daily last night, which is good, step in the right direction. Typically a difficult matchup. And then I have a couple Arbor Colossuses for Desecration Demons and Storm Breath Dragons. You also bring this in against Mono Blue, although it's not very good there. It's just, you know, passable. It's a reasonable upgrade to some of your cards you have already. 3rd Eidolon Blossoms against the grindy decks. And you have to pay attention. Like, you have to know if, say, against Jund monsters, like, they're boarding in a bunch of removal. And the matchup that was suddenly not grindy is suddenly very grindy. So this, like, whether or not I keep this in against decks like Mono Blue, like, they might board in a bunch of counter spells and slow their deck down, at which point I want these. Or Jund monsters, where they're going to board in a bunch of removal spells and slow their deck down, and then I want these. I definitely want these against control decks. I definitely want these against black decks. But I think this main deck configuration is going to be better against the field as a whole. So then, a couple Nylea's Disciples. I do want a 3rd one. The burn matchup is not terrible by any, you know, sense of the imagination or whatever. Like, we got big guys. We're putting pressure on them. We can race their burn spells pretty effectively. And if you ever play a Disciple, it's basically lights out. So, and then I have some Golgari Charms, and I'm trying Jacob Baugh's Thoughtseizes. And he was bringing these in a bunch of different places, like against monsters, to try and snipe their mortars, I think. But they only have like 2 mortars, you know, it's not that big of a deal. But one of the losses in the Invitational was to control, so I'm trying a different control sideboard configuration, which in this case means boarding in a bunch of Thoughtseizes and Golgari Charms instead of just Golgari Charms. So I'm not 100% sold on that. I don't know if it's going to actually work, but I figured I would give it a try. So anyway, if I borrow this daily event, I will be willing to play this in Portland, but we'll see how that goes. So, you know, like I said, this is kind of like a prototype. The first event I played it was last night. The second one is right now, and the sideboarding numbers might not line up. I kind of just like eyeballed it, but didn't really do the hard math for like what goes in and out. And yeah, it might be, like I said, you know, too far on one end of the spectrum or not. So I am not expecting a ton of big results from this deck, but I do think it is a step in the right direction at the very least. So let's get into the games.